Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and discover that everyone you've ever known has been secretly following a script. A detailed manual about how to interact with you, what to expect from you, and who you're supposed to be. Your parents, your friends, your colleagues, even strangers on the street, they all have pages dedicated to your character, your predictable responses, your comfortable limitations. But here's the unsettling part. You realize you've been following the same script about yourself, playing a role so convincingly that you forgot it was a performance. The person you think you are isn't you. It's a character everyone agreed you should play, including yourself. The person staring back has spent decades perfecting the art of being acceptable. They've memorized the scripts of social interaction, mastered the performance of belonging, and learned to speak in voices that aren't quite their own. They've become a masterpiece of adaptation, so perfectly molded to fit the expectations of others that the original shape has been completely forgotten. And in that moment of brutal 3 a.m. clarity, you're forced to confront a truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You have no idea who you actually are beneath all the layers of borrowed identity. This isn't just an identity crisis. It's an existential emergency. Because what if everything you think defines you, your beliefs, your values, your dreams, even your fears, what if none of it actually belongs to you? What if you've been living someone else's life so convincingly that you've forgotten it isn't yours? The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche saw this crisis coming over a century ago. He recognized that modern humanity was sleepwalking through existence, trapped in what he called the herd mentality, a collective unconsciousness where individual authenticity is sacrificed on the altar of social conformity. But Nietzsche didn't just diagnose the problem. He offered something far more dangerous and liberating, a path to discovering who you really are when all the masks are finally stripped away. Here's the paradox that will haunt you. The very process of trying to find your true self reveals that there might not be a fixed self to find. What if authenticity isn't about uncovering some hidden, essential you that's been waiting patiently beneath the surface? What if it's about something far more terrifying and empowering, the realization that you are not a discovery to be made, but a creation to be forged? Think about the last time you acted in a way that surprised even you. That moment when you spoke words that felt foreign in your mouth, or made a decision that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than your conscious mind. In that instant, something authentic broke through the carefully constructed facade. But was it the real you emerging, or was it you becoming real for the first time? Nietzsche believed that most people live their entire lives without ever meeting themselves. They die as strangers to their own souls, having spent decades performing elaborate impersonations of who they thought they should be. They follow scripts written by their culture, their family, their fears, never realizing that the pen was always in their own hand. But what would happen if you stopped performing? What would remain if you shed every borrowed belief, every inherited value, every carefully crafted persona you've used to navigate the world? Would you find a solid core of authentic selfhood? Or would you discover something far more unsettling, an empty space where you expected to find yourself? This is where Nietzsche's philosophy becomes both terrifying and liberating. He suggests that the absence you might find isn't a problem to be solved. It's an opportunity to be seized. Because if there's no predetermined self waiting to be discovered, then you are free to become anything. But this freedom comes with a price that most people are unwilling to pay: complete responsibility for who you become. The question that will determine the trajectory of your existence is this: do you have the courage to meet the person you could become if you stopped hiding behind who you think you should be? Before we dive deeper into this unsettling journey, take a moment to support this exploration. If you find yourself drawn to these uncomfortable truths about existence and authenticity, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. Share this with someone who you sense is also trapped in their own performance, someone ready to question everything they think they know about themselves. Comment below with your thoughts as we continue. Your insights could spark the kind of dangerous conversations that actually change lives. Now, let's begin to uncover the machinery behind your borrowed identity. This script you've been following isn't accidental. It's the product of a sophisticated psychological machinery that began operating the moment you drew your first breath. From infancy, you were conditioned to seek approval, to avoid rejection, to conform to the subtle and not so subtle demands of those around you. What you call your personality is actually a survival mechanism, a carefully crafted adaptation designed to keep you safe, accepted, and loved. But here's the cruel irony. The very mechanism that was supposed to protect you has become your prison. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this trap with devastating clarity. He recognized that human beings are meaning-making creatures who will sacrifice their authenticity for the comfort of belonging. We are so terrified of rejection, so desperate for validation, that we willingly surrender our individual will to what he called the herd, the collective consciousness that demands conformity in exchange for security. The herd doesn't explicitly tell you who to be. It's far more insidious than that. It rewards certain behaviors while punishing others, slowly shaping you into a version of yourself that fits its needs rather than your own. Carl Jung called this phenomenon the persona, the mask we wear to navigate social situations. But what happens when the mask becomes so convincing that we forget we're wearing it? Jung warned that when we identify completely with our persona, we lose touch with what he termed the shadow, all the rejected, repressed aspects of ourselves that didn't fit the approved script. The shadow doesn't disappear. It festers in the unconscious, creating an inner split that manifests as anxiety, depression, a gnawing sense that something essential is missing from our lives. Think about the choices you've made throughout your life. How many were genuinely yours, and how many were influenced by the invisible pressure to be acceptable? That career path you chose, was it because it ignited something deep within you, or because it satisfied others' expectations of success? Those relationships you've maintained, are they based on authentic connection, or on the mutual agreement to reinforce each other's familiar patterns? Even your moral beliefs, your political opinions, your aesthetic preferences, how many emerged from genuine inner conviction versus the subconscious desire to belong to a particular tribe? Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor, argued that most human behavior is driven by what he called the will to live. But this isn't the noble drive for existence that it sounds like. Instead, it's a blind, unconscious force that compels us to survive and reproduce, often at the expense of our individual consciousness and authenticity. We become slaves to biological and social imperatives that care nothing for our personal fulfillment or self-actualization. Nietzsche took this insight further, recognizing that modern civilization had created a particularly insidious form of this enslavement. Unlike our ancestors who faced clear external threats that demanded genuine courage and strength, we face the subtle tyranny of social conformity. We're not fighting for physical survival. We're fighting for psychological survival in a world that rewards mediocrity and punishes excellence, that celebrates the average and fears the exceptional. This is why you feel that persistent sense of unease, that nagging suspicion that you're living someone else's life. Your authentic self, the wild, untamed, creative force that exists beneath all the conditioning, is suffocating under layers of social programming. It sends up distress signals, restlessness, emptiness, the feeling of being trapped in a life that looks successful from the outside but feels hollow from within. The existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre described this condition as bad faith, the human tendency to deny our fundamental freedom and responsibility by pretending we have no choice but to be who we are. We convince ourselves that our limitations are permanent, our roles are fixed, our possibilities are predetermined. It's easier to believe we're victims of circumstance than to face the terrifying reality that we are, in Sartre's words, condemned to be free. But here's where the problem becomes truly insidious. The script isn't just imposed from outside. You've become its most dedicated enforcer. You police your own thoughts, censor your own desires, and limit your own possibilities before anyone else even has the chance to reject them. You've internalized the herd's values so completely that you experience them as your own authentic preferences. The prison has become invisible because you've learned to love your chains. This is the hidden mechanism behind what psychologists call learned helplessness. The condition where individuals give up trying to escape painful situations because they've been conditioned to believe escape is impossible. But what if the cage door has been open all along? The tragedy isn't just that you've lost touch with your authentic self. It's that you don't even realize what you've lost. Like a person born in captivity who has never seen the sky, you've adapted so completely to your limitations that you mistake them for the natural order of things. The consequences of this existential sleepwalking ripple through every aspect of your life, creating a reality that feels simultaneously familiar and profoundly wrong. Consider the phenomenon of what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to rewire itself based on repeated patterns of thought and behavior. Every time you suppress an authentic impulse, every time you choose safety over truth, every time you perform the expected response instead of the genuine one, you literally carve deeper grooves in your neural pathways. You're training your brain to default to inauthenticity until the performance becomes so automatic that you forget it's a performance at all. This is why breaking free feels so impossibly difficult. It's not just a matter of changing your mind. You've physically restructured your consciousness to support a false version of yourself. The authentic impulses that occasionally surface feel foreign and threatening because they contradict the neural architecture you've spent years constructing. Your brain interprets any move toward authenticity as a threat to the survival system it has so carefully built. But the consequences extend far beyond individual psychology. When entire populations live inauthentically, societies become theaters of collective delusion. We create cultures where success is measured by how well you can perform, rather than how deeply you can feel, where intelligence is valued over wisdom, where comfort is prioritized over growth. We build institutions that reward conformity and punish originality, then wonder why our world feels increasingly soulless and mechanical. Nietzsche saw this cultural sickness with prophetic clarity. He predicted that as traditional sources of meaning, religion, tradition, clear social hierarchies began to crumble, humanity would face what he called nihilism, the terrifying realization that there might be no inherent meaning to existence. But instead of facing this void courageously and creating new meaning, most people would retreat into what he termed slave morality, a system of values designed to make weakness feel virtuous and mediocrity feel noble. Look around you. Notice how often people celebrate victimhood over heroism, how they find more identity in their limitations than their possibilities. Watch how society has learned to pathologize strength, ambition, and individual excellence as somehow selfish or dangerous. This isn't accidental. It's the natural result of a culture that has forgotten how to produce authentic human beings. The psychological cost is staggering. Depression rates skyrocket not because life has become objectively worse, but because people sense the profound disconnect between who they are and who they could be. Anxiety becomes epidemic not because the world is more dangerous, but because living inauthentically requires constant vigilance to maintain the performance. Addiction flourishes not because substances have become more available, but because people desperately need to numb the pain of existential emptiness. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, observed that humans can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But what happens when the meaning itself is borrowed, when the purpose you're living for isn't actually yours? You end up with what Frankl called an existential vacuum, a life that looks full from the outside but feels hollow from within. This is why you can achieve everything society told you would make you happy and still feel profoundly unsatisfied. The promotion, the relationship, the house, the recognition. They're all rewards for playing a character that isn't you. You're winning a game you never chose to play, pursuing prizes that can't satisfy the authentic hunger within you. Your relationships become mirrors reflecting back not who you are, but who you've agreed to pretend to be. Children growing up in this environment learn that love is conditional on performance, that acceptance requires conformity, that their authentic selves are not worthy of care. They develop what psychologists call false self-disorder, a condition where the real self becomes so buried under layers of adaptation that it effectively disappears. The cycle perpetuates itself across generations, creating families, communities, and cultures built on elaborate systems of mutual deception. But perhaps the most devastating consequence is the loss of what Nietzsche called the will to power, not the desire to dominate others, but the drive to become who you truly are, to actualize your highest potential, to transform suffering into strength. When this fundamental drive is suppressed, life becomes merely a matter of survival rather than creation, maintenance rather than growth, reaction rather than action. You become what Nietzsche termed the last man, a being so perfectly adapted to comfort and mediocrity that they've lost the capacity for greatness, for struggle, for the very qualities that make existence worth living. The last man blinks and asks, "What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star?" They have concepts for these things, but no longer access to the experiences themselves. Here's where everything changes. Here's where Nietzsche offers not just diagnosis, but revolution. Because the moment you truly understand that your current self is a construction, you realize something that will either terrify or liberate you. If it was constructed, it can be deconstructed. If it was learned, it can be unlearned. If it was created, it can be recreated. But this isn't self-help. This isn't about positive thinking or gradual improvement. This is about something far more radical: the complete demolition of the false self and the conscious creation of something authentic in its place. Nietzsche called this process self-overcoming, and it requires a kind of courage that most people can't even imagine, let alone summon. The first step is what Nietzsche termed the death of God. Not a literal theological statement, but a psychological revolution. You must kill the internal authority figures that have been dictating your choices, the voice of your parents that still judges your decisions, the echo of teachers who told you what you couldn't do, the internalized expectations of a society that rewards conformity over courage. These aren't external forces anymore. They're parts of your own psyche that must be consciously dismantled. Think about the moments in history when individuals broke free from collective delusion. Galileo insisting that the earth revolves around the sun despite the Inquisition's threats. Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat despite a system designed to crush her resistance. Van Gogh painting his vision despite a world that called him mad. What they all shared wasn't just courage. It was the willingness to trust their own experience over collective opinion, to value inner truth over external approval. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming your own creator of values. Not that you reject all moral principles, but that you consciously choose which ones serve your authentic development, rather than unconsciously inheriting them from others. You become what he called a free spirit, someone who has earned the right to their own opinions through rigorous self-examination and the courage to stand alone when necessary. But here's the paradox. The moment you stop seeking others' approval, you often begin to receive it. The moment you stop performing authenticity, you often become genuinely attractive. The moment you stop trying to fit in, you often find your tribe. This isn't a strategy. It's a natural consequence of becoming real in a world full of performances. Consider the concept of what psychologists call individuation, Jung's term for the process of becoming who you truly are, rather than who others expect you to be. It requires what he called withdrawing projections, stopping the habit of seeing in others what you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. Most people spend their lives projecting their unlived potential onto heroes, their shadow qualities onto enemies, and their authentic desires onto unattainable ideals. Individuation means reclaiming all of these projected aspects and integrating them into a complete, authentic self. The rebellion also requires what Nietzsche called Amor Fati, love of fate. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of whatever happens to you. It means embracing everything that has happened as necessary for your becoming. Your trauma, your failures, your disappointments. All of it becomes raw material for creating something authentic. Instead of being a victim of your circumstances, you become their artist. Look at individuals throughout history who transformed their suffering into strength. Dostoevsky writing his greatest works after experiencing imprisonment and exile. Helen Keller becoming a powerful voice for human potential despite her disabilities. Nelson Mandela emerging from 27 years in prison, not broken but strengthened. They didn't overcome their challenges by avoiding them. They overcame them by integrating them into a larger vision of who they could become. This is the essence of what Nietzsche called the will to power. Not domination over others, but mastery over yourself. It's the decision to become the author of your own story rather than a character in someone else's narrative. It's the choice to create meaning rather than inherit it, to forge values rather than adopt them, to build identity rather than discover it. But the rebellion comes with a price. The moment you begin living authentically, you'll discover that many of your relationships were based on mutual pretense. People who were attracted to your performance may be threatened by your authenticity. Systems that rewarded your conformity may begin to resist your individuality. You may find yourself more alone than you've ever been. But for the first time, you'll be alone with yourself rather than alone despite yourself. This is where most people retreat back to their comfortable cages. The price of freedom feels too high, the responsibility too overwhelming. They choose the familiar misery of inauthenticity over the uncertain adventure of becoming real. But for those with the courage to continue, something extraordinary awaits. Something Nietzsche called the birth of the Übermensch. Here is the truth that will either destroy you or remake you completely. You are not a human being having a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual force having a human experience. And that force, that creative power at your core, is not waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be unleashed. The Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, is not about becoming superior to others. It's about becoming superior to who you used to be. It's about transcending the human tendency toward mediocrity, fear, and unconscious living. The Übermensch is what you become when you stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What do I will into existence?" This is Nietzsche's ultimate revelation. You are not a fixed entity trying to find your place in a predetermined world. You are a creative force capable of reshaping reality through the sheer power of your authentic will. Every moment you live consciously, every choice you make from your authentic center, every action you take that aligns with your deepest truth, these aren't just personal decisions. They are acts of creation that ripple out into the world, influencing others to remember their own creative potential. Think about the people who have most impacted human consciousness. Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree and refusing to move until he understood the nature of suffering. Socrates choosing death over compromising his commitment to truth. Joan of Arc leading armies because she heard a voice that others couldn't hear. What made them transformative wasn't their perfection. It was their willingness to trust their inner knowing over external consensus reality. But here's what most people miss about these figures. They weren't born enlightened. They became enlightened through the same process available to you right now. They faced the abyss of meaninglessness and chose to create meaning. They confronted the void where predetermined purpose should be and decided to become the authors of purpose itself. This is the secret that organized religion, political systems, and social institutions don't want you to discover. You don't need their permission to become who you truly are. You don't need their validation to live authentically. You don't need their approval to create your own values. The power they claim to hold over you exists only as long as you believe you need what they're offering. The moment you realize that meaning isn't given but created, that purpose isn't assigned but chosen, that identity isn't discovered but forged, in that moment you become dangerous to every system that depends on your unconsciousness. You become a force of nature rather than a product of nurture. But with this realization comes the most profound responsibility imaginable. If you are the creator of your own meaning, then you are also responsible for the meaning you create. If you are the author of your own values, then you must answer for the values you author. If you are the architect of your own identity, then the structure you build will either contribute to human flourishing or human diminishment. This is why Nietzsche insisted that becoming the Übermensch requires what he called the eternal recurrence, the willingness to live your life in such a way that you could joyfully repeat every moment, every choice, every consequence for eternity. Not because everything will be perfect, but because everything will be authentic. Not because there will be no suffering, but because the suffering will have meaning that you consciously created. Imagine living with such integrity that every action aligns with your deepest truth. Imagine speaking with such authenticity that your words carry the power to awaken others from their unconscious slumber. Imagine creating with such passion that your very existence becomes a work of art that inspires others to remember their own creative potential. This is not a fantasy. This is your birthright. This is what you were designed for before the world convinced you to settle for less. The person you could become, the one who lives without apology, creates without permission, loves without conditions, and thinks without limitations, that person is not separate from who you are right now. They are who you are when all the borrowed identities are stripped away, when all the inherited fears are transcended, when all the unconscious patterns are brought into the light of conscious choice. This is the ultimate truth. You are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. And the living of that mystery, fully and consciously, is the greatest gift you can give to a world desperately in need of authentic human beings. The time for pretending is over. The time for becoming has begun.